So I want to start this presentation with a question. What is your first experience with bison as a dish, and how commonly have you seen it served? For me, it was as buffalo burgers in Crow Agency, Montana, and I've seen it served relatively commonly since then, as steak or even as beef for sale in marketplaces. So why is that? For a species that was once almost completely extinct to be now sold in marketplaces and marketed as a edible product, how did we get to this point? Well, to answer that question, it takes quite a bit of ecological and historical background, which I will try to guide you through over the next couple of minutes. So, as I try to guide you through the answer to that question, you'll be able to watch me try to cook my first ever bison-based meal, which had its ups and downs, but it ended up being really great. And as a general idea of what I plan to do over the course of this presentation, first I'll introduce the ingredients, which are pretty basic, but I want to go ahead and make sure that you understand how I'm doing this and what ingredients I'm using. And then also I want to talk about the historical background of how bison almost went extinct, and then finally the ecology and how people are using bison now to promote ecology and also promote health. So first, let me introduce the ingredients I'll be using. Here you can see this is a pound of ground bison meat, and that's what I'm going to be making the burgers out of. Not pictured are the buns that I'll be using, as well as some cheese. Here's the grill I'll be using to cook them on. I'm actually pointing at the wrong one here, it's the one to the left, but that's the grill I'll be using to cook. In order to understand how bison have come to be served as a dish today, you really have to understand a bison's recent history. For hundreds of years, bison were the cornerstone of indigenous civilizations in the Great Plains. However, in the 1830s, bison began to be hunted in large numbers as Native Americans were incentivized to bring in as many hides as they could to traders. By the 1860s, white American hunters had moved in and were killing as many buffalo as they could, taking the hides and leaving the rest to rot in the sun. In 1870 alone, it's estimated that 2 million buffalo were killed just in the southern plains. While the underlying cause of this ecological disaster was the incredible greed of Americans, the fact that the U.S. government made a minimal effort to conserve the species most certainly did not help. The primary method for hunting bison, which is called still hunting, was also, unfortunately, highly efficient. This involved sometimes just one person sitting on top of a hill and killing as many buffalo as they could. And for whatever reason, buffalo just weren't scared of guns, so it was really easy to kill hundreds of buffalo in one sitting. After several years of being extensively overhunted like that, in the 1880s the bison population collapsed. With fewer than 350 wild bison left in the U.S., the future of the species seemed dire. Thankfully, as bison were being hunted to near extinction, some people began to capture wild bison in an effort to preserve the species. In all reality, these people were critical to preventing the extinction of the bison, because the federal government didn't start to take steps to preserve bison until several private herds had been established and almost all of the wild bison in the U.S. were gone. The domestication of wild bison also created an industry where bison were raised so that their meat could be sold at markets. This meant that their existence now had some form of monetary value, and they were likely to be preserved. Yet many conservationists and ecologists were still concerned. In the years following the near eradication of the bison, many species, such as wolves, wolverines, grizzly bears, and black-footed ferrets, also almost completely disappeared from the Great Plains. As it turns out, bison are considered a keystone species, which is a species that plays a crucial role in maintaining a healthy ecosystem. Bison are primary consumers, which means that they are one of few animals on the Great Plains that facilitate the movement of energy and nutrients up the food chain. Without them, the majority of the large predators on the plains have no source of food. On top of that, bison also manage the habitat for smaller animals, such as prairie dogs, which need relatively clear visibility from the top of their burrows in order to detect predators. Without bison available to clear tall grass away from their burrows, many prairie dogs become much more susceptible to predation. Bison also have a large effect on the habitat itself. For example, bison grazing limits the occurrences of large, devastating prairie fires by preventing the buildup of potential fuels. Of course, this also has a positive impact on many prairie species as it prevents habitat destruction and food loss. Bison are also a crucial part of the nitrogen cycle on the Great Plains because by preventing frequent destructive fires, they're also preventing the combustion of nitrogen, and most importantly, their waste products put nitrogen back into the environment instead of exporting it out. Finally, bison also promote the growth and health of many plant species because their waste products act as natural fertilizers for those species. Recent ecological research has shown that managing private or public herds of bison on the Great Plains can help to restore biodiversity there. This has led individuals like Fred Dubray of the Cheyenne River Sioux to advocate for free-range bison ranching, which is where bison are allowed to graze in open fields rather than being confined to an enclosure. In the late 1990s, Dubray convinced his tribe's tribal council to purchase a 21,500-acre ranch called the VE Ranch. His goal was to recreate the historical prairie habitat in order to create a nature park that could act as a tourist site. In order to create the park, the tribe took down all of the internal fences and let the native plants flourish for a few years before releasing 2,000 bison onto the property. Now the property boasts the presence of antelopes and prairie dogs, whose habitats have been promoted by grazing bison. These bison are not just providing economic and ecological benefits to the Cheyenne River Sioux, though. They also provide a source of healthy food to a community that has historically faced food apartheid. Primarily because of food apartheid, type 2 diabetes is common on reservations across the U.S., including that of the Cheyenne River Sioux. Research from the early 2000s shows that range-fed bison meat is very lean when compared with cattle or elk, for example. Using these recent research developments, Dubray has encouraged a return to tradition for many tribes on the Great Plains. His family has started to discard the unhealthy native foods such as fry bread, which have roots in the beginning of the reservation system, in favor of bison. Also, his daughter Elsie has begun to work on scientific research to help prove that buffalo meat is in fact healthier, and perhaps it is a way to solve the diabetes epidemic that Native American communities across the United States are currently facing. In conclusion, while buffalo were once nearly extinct, their current population is estimated to be at more than 400,000 individuals. The majority of these bison reside in private herds. Fred Dubray's Intertribal Bison Cooperative is responsible for 15,000 of those bison. They started with only 5-member tribes, but now they have 53 members. The only major obstacle that they face, as of right now, is a lack of consistency in bison meat's value. But this is an issue that we as consumers can help solve. If the American public made an effort to begin replacing many of our beef dishes, such as burgers, with bison, ranchers like Mr. Dubray would have access to a consistent market, and they could continue to promote the ecological restoration of bison and the prairie. While the bison and the prairie that they inhabited will most likely never be fully restored to their pre-European state, if the obstacles in market value can be overcome, then the future looks very bright for the both of them. So the next time that you crave a burger or a steak, consider swapping beef for bison and help save the prairie and bison, one bison burger at a time. So now to close this out and step away from the more informative portion of my presentation, here's the final result. After a lot of obstacles, this is what the final result looks like, and they tasted amazing. So overall, I feel like I did a pretty good job cooking.